So I think I will wait to do some of the reminders of the sound effects that we don't want to have coming from your pockets or your purses. And also, I think we'll just start welcoming the people on Zoom who might be with us this morning. And I will tell you that our dear leader, Lori, is being a grandma in Virginia this weekend. But we'll ask blessings on all of you mothers and turn it over to Jessica.
All right, thank you. Here, okay. All right, cool. I didn't mess it up too bad yet, so that's good. So far, so good. We'll try to not scream into it either. That's going to be the hard part, though. All right. That's what I want to do, is just mess with it. All right, so my name's Jessica Presley. I work with Community Action House, so thank you first for spending your Sunday after church here with me to talk about that on Mother's Day and this beautiful weather and tulip time, all of that great stuff. So I'm glad that I can be here to talk a little bit. So like I said, I'm the senior manager with Housing Access at Community Action House. So we work directly with people who are experiencing homelessness and looking to get into housing. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of explaining who we are with Community Action House, talk about some pretty common myths or stereotypes around homelessness, what's really driving homelessness in our community, what we're seeing actually works, and then how ways we can help. And then I'm going to go through the presentation and give time for question afterwards. So a little bit about Community Action House. We are a locally founded, locally funded nonprofit. A lot of people probably have heard maybe of the Community Kitchen, which is out of working right now with Western Theological Seminary. We have our food club out on Paw Paw Drive. But we were founded back in 1969 as a group of individuals, churches, community leaders who really just wanted to find a way to offer a place for people to come in, a really radically welcoming center for people who are struggling with different things to come and meet and start talking through those. So currently we have over 70 staff and we have over 2,800 volunteers on a yearly basis. So we have, again, locally funded. Most of our grants are through kindness of people who are working to help see our community thrive. So what we do, this is kind of just our quick way of putting, we like to nourish, equip, and empower. We serve over 13,000 neighbors each year through our different programming. So for our Nourish side, we want to increase healthy food access. So again, I talked about our food club and opportunity hub. That's about 3 years old out on Paw Paw Drive. They basically took the idea of a food pantry and turned it into a grocery store model. So people can come in and shop with points based on your family size and income level. So you get to actually go in and pick foods that are going to be healthy for you and your family. What's a little unique about it that I really enjoy is that all our produce and our healthier options, so fruits, veggies, things like that, are lower cost or lower points, encouraging you to get more of those healthy pieces in your diet. We also have our community kitchen that serves 7 days a week for people to come in and get a meal, and anybody in the community is welcome. They have great food. My daughter's been there a few times to try some of out. Chef Heidi is amazing. We have our Lakeshore Food Rescue that works with a lot of local grocery stores, but also across the Midwest in gathering food that would have gone to waste. And when we say that, basically it's just saying food that the grocery store didn't deem fit, or maybe it was nearing an expiration date, or they just had excess. Our Lakeshore Food Rescue goes around, picks it up, brings it in, and then gets it into the hands of either schools or people we partner with. We have local churches we partner with, and then our food club and all of that. So, and then we have our Holland Community Garden up on the north side that really helps. They're working on all sorts of fun stuff growing this year. That's all volunteer led and run, and that provides food for our community kitchen. For the equip part, a big part of what I'm going to spend time talking about is we have our resource navigation, our homeless street outreach team, and then our partnership with First United Methodist Church with the Refresh program. And that's really meant to try and connect people who are facing some real challenges, particularly homelessness or housing instability, access resources they need to move forward. And then what we want to do is then empower them. So we recognize that we don't want people to face these challenges alone, but we also want to build skills so that they can face those challenges, move past those challenges, and build stability to hopefully get out of poverty. So we have financial wellness classes that we offer, credit building, we have savings club, home ownership classes. We right now have been doing If anyone's heard of VITA, which is Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, it's all volunteer-led. They helped bring over $1 million back into the community for people through their tax assistance. And then people could take a class on how to best spend your tax refund and what to do with it. So not just wanting to meet some of those basic needs, get people food, get them equipped to move forward, but what can we do to help them not get stuck in that cycle of poverty moving forward. So why do we do it? 30% of households in Ottawa County struggle to afford basic needs. 37% of adults don't even have $400 to cover an emergency. And then over 32,000 of our neighbors struggle with food insecurity. So there's a real need for people in our community to access some of those resources, and we just want to kind of step into those. We recognize that one challenge in an area could intensify a challenge in another. So if you don't have access to healthy food and you're making choices to maybe not provide that, that can snowball into other areas of your lives, right? So we wanted to find a way to step into those when they're struggling with deep, complex things, to navigate those and hopefully get out of them. So why I'm here to talk about kind of the outreach and housing access is we have what's called our Homeless Street Outreach Team. It is comprised of 8 team members. We have a recovery specialist and a newly added care coordinator. This is a team of very highly trained, trauma-informed. They go out to meet people where they're at and try to address the barriers to accessing housing. So we're very fortunate in 2024, 118 of our neighbors they work with found stable housing. And we were able to connect 41 individuals with our recovery coach to assess for different treatment needs. So currently in 2025, we have 37 people who have just found housing, so that's a great success. But these take times. One individual, he just moved in this past week. We were able to get him some supplies, and he just was so excited to be able to come home from work every day and have a place to live. He was living in his vehicle for almost a year outside of his employment. So, and we'll dig into some more of that, but so speaking of our Homeless Street Outreach Team, what is kind of our approach and what do we do? So we really try to bridge those gaps out of homelessness. Sorry if I start yelling, I forget that this thing's on. So try to not yell into it. We meet people where they're at, literally and emotionally. So they're out in the streets. If you ever go to the Herrick District Library, we go meet people there, public settings, encampments, anywhere that somebody might be to kind of offer that practical support. But we also want to give encouragement. We use what we call a person-centered approach, which is an evidence-based, where we focus on trying to build those relationships, but also figuring out what does that particular person need to exit homelessness, because all of it's very complex. We prioritize safe shelter, and our team's primary goal is to get people off the streets, whatever that could look like, whether that's the emergency shelter here in town. Sometimes it's busing people out to emergency shelters in Kent County, the Gospel Mission in Kalamazoo, the Rescue Mission in Holland, depending on what the individual needs are. Are there friends and family they could stay with? We want to prioritize getting people off the streets. So we use what's called kind of a housing first approach, recognizing that if anyone's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if not, it's this pyramid that basically says in order to start progressing forward in your whatever you want to work on, you got to have food, shelter, water, sleep, basic needs. I don't know how many of you have ever woken up on the wrong side of the bed, or maybe you get a little hangry. That's me. If I don't meet some of those basic needs, I'm less likely to be as productive in my normal everyday life than if I meet those basic needs. So a housing first approach is basically saying, can we get people somewhere inside safe to take away, hopefully, that safe shelter piece? They can start working on those next steps. We also recognize that that's not always an easy answer. If there was an easy button, I would have pushed it already. I have not found it, so if anyone finds it, please share. But we meet those urgent needs to keep people alive, but also sometimes the individuals we're working with, particularly ones that have been struggling with homelessness for a long time, struggle with a lot of barriers, whether it's trauma, complex issues. Sometimes meeting that basic need is our team's way of saying, hey, I see you, I understand you, let's build a relationship so we can work together to find housing. So it's really an essential tool that we strategically use to work with people like, hey, let's get some water and a granola bar, let's sit down and chat. Build that relationship, start building off trust so that people who are really struggling can feel like, okay, this person's kind of safe, I can talk with them. Then they start to open up and we can address what may be the challenges to finding housing. And I will say the systems people need to do to get off the streets out of housing, very complex. Anyone who's worked a job, you have to turn in lots of documents, you have to go to interviews, you have to do all these different pieces. If you don't have an ID, you're one step behind. So we start with, okay, we got to get an ID. In order to get an ID, you need a birth certificate. Well, what if you don't have your birth certificate? Okay, well, let's get a birth certificate. You need your social security card. We don't have our social security card. Well, we need an ID to get that, or we need all these other forms. So they don't make the systems easy to navigate, and if you imagine trying to navigate that while living outside under extreme stress, our brains are not wired to handle that well, so we go straight to give up mode, is kind of what we call it. You go to survival brain, survival mode. So we try to help navigate those complex systems with people, knowing that this is really challenging. We're asking you to do a lot of stuff, and you're not even sure where you're going to sleep tonight, or where your next meal's coming from. Things we often, or where you're going to go to the bathroom next. Something we sometimes take for granted when we have housing. So we use all of those pieces to help us navigate forward with people. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the common myths or stereotypes people might hear of when they think of housing. One of them, people are homeless because they made bad choices. I don't know if anyone's heard that or even thought it. Before I started in housing, my background was not in housing. I had a lot to learn. I've definitely heard these or have had those thoughts. Most people are homeless because they can't afford a place to live. So we have all probably made bad choices in our lives, or choices that had consequences, right? We usually have a place to go with that. What we're seeing right now is that when those potential choices that have harder consequences, they're leading to a housing crisis because there's not affordable places for people to go. The data is showing that as housing costs go up and the availability of housing goes down, homelessness goes up. So even one little $100, $200 increase to rent when you're already struggling with things can be detrimental and can put people out on the streets. Everyone has a little bit of a risk factor experiencing homelessness, but as we see the availability of housing decrease, more people are experiencing that. So right now, Ottawa County has, in the last housing needs assessment, they had a 1% rental vacancy rate. We think it's up to about 3% now. That's not a lot. A healthy system has anywhere from 4 to 7% rental vacancy rate. So that gives you a perspective. If there's less places for people to live, one small setback can really push them down to that spiral. And that's a really hard place to get out of once you reach there. The data also shows that here in Ottawa County, the median home values are 4 times greater than the median income. Anyone knows like hermit crabs, the little hermit crabs, they live in their shells, they're really cute. So hermit crabs do this thing where when they outgrow their home, their shell, they go find bigger shells. They'll line up in a row and kind of trade shells and move into the bigger ones. What we're seeing is that since these home prices in our area are so much higher, there's not enough places that our families, as they grow, are not moving into those bigger shells, bigger homes. They're staying put. Or senior citizens right now on fixed incomes. They can't afford, they're trying to downsize into smaller places. Without homes in all these different levels and people not able to move into them, we get bottlenecked. And so those of our individuals that are struggling the most with low income, stagnant wages, it pushes them either out of those or no place to go. So we're seeing an increase in homelessness partially because we are one of the highest in the state. I think we're behind Traverse City area in this median income and like Washtenaw County. So it really makes it challenging for people who are experiencing some of our deepest struggles to find housing. So we really need housing across all levels, but we also need to see some wages go up and that affordability come a little closer to where they meet. So why does that myth kind of stick a little bit? When we see somebody kind of living outside, it's really easy to assume that they're there because they made a bad decision. It is. It's also easier to be like, okay, I don't know what's going on, so I've heard that they made bad choices, so we leave it be. But that really ignores that bigger picture that in a healthy housing market, people can recover from a setback. You have an unexpected medical bill, or your wages, your housing price went up just a little bit. If you don't have a lot of flex in that space to protect you, you're seeing a lot more evictions, you're seeing a lot more people having to go live in their vehicles. It's really expensive for housing. So if we don't look at that piece of it, it's really easy to assume it was just a bad choice when there's not enough housing. So another myth, it's primarily caused by mental illness. It's not. The majority of unhoused people don't have a serious mental illnesses. Now, it's definitely part of a story, and data shows that about 1 in 4 people experiencing homelessness have a serious mental illness, but that does mean that 3 out of 4 don't. So the challenge a little bit with this is that there is a higher percentage of people experiencing homelessness with a mental challenge. One, they typically make it harder to do all of those daily living, manage your bills, right? Make sure you pay everything on time. All of those pieces. You have an unexpected medical bill that you now need to handle, or you lose your job. How do you navigate that? You only have less than $400 in a savings, which about 37% of our county does. You have a mental illness on that. It can really make it super challenging to kind of navigate those next steps. But again, if only 1 in 4 have a serious mental illness, what's really driving homelessness? The data for our area shows that it's really when that personal crisis meets kind of that broken system. So lack of housing, unaffordable housing, stagnant wages, we see that increase of homelessness. The leading causes of homelessness are actually lack of affordable housing, poverty and low income, job loss, family conflict, and domestic violence is actually one of the leading causes for women. So it's not serious mental illness. All of us have risk factors, by the way, for this, right? We've challenged with different things throughout our lives, whether that is a job loss or an unexpected medical thing. But the combination of those risk factors happens to a great deal of us, but we still remained housed, right? So this myth kind of sticks a little bit because that's what we see. If you're walking down, if you see somebody who's kind of confused, they're talking to themselves, they're having that mental health crisis in public, we notice it, right? It's different. Might make us feel a little uncomfortable. Not unsafe, just uncomfortable because it's not something we're typically used to seeing. But we see that, and it's really easy to take that visible moment and say, oh, that's homelessness in and of itself. When again, most people on our team right now has 153 people that they're working with, I think. You don't see 153 people outside. And if you do, I'd love to chat because I'm pretty we're missing some people. So it's really easy, though, to make that assumption and that connection when majority, again, back to that 3/4 of people are living in their vehicles. They're going to work. They're living on friends' couches, just trying to survive. So that's one that I hear often, but it makes sense, right? If you see somebody struggling, it's really easy to group that because our brain wants to do that. It wants to label it and understand what's happening. Another myth, homelessness is growing faster here because we're giving out too much free stuff. Homelessness is growing because housing is unaffordable. Rising rents with lack of affordable housing, there are the biggest drivers everywhere. Not even, this is national. Nationally, homelessness has gone up. Not just in Ottawa County, it's gone up 18% across the nation. So we're not alone in this, but it's not because we're giving out free stuff. It's really that lack of a safe, stable place to live. What the data shows for Ottawa County, our unsheltered homelessness has increased. But other places in Grand Rapids, they have day centers. They offer soup kitchens. I was able to go visit a mobile shower unit recently where they partner with a local church, similarly to Refresh over on First United. They have 4 outreach teams that work together. They see it too, but their numbers remain lower than ours. So it's not giving out free stuff. Access to that, what we call kind of survival aid, doesn't cause people to stay homeless. Lack of housing does. Go back to that slide we talked about. The less housing we have available, the higher the rents and prices go, and the lower those wages are, the increase in homelessness. So why does that myth kind of stick a little bit? When we see people receiving help, like a hot meal or maybe a sleeping bag, it's really easy to assume that that's why they're homeless. But I don't know if I'm a big wimp when it comes to winter. I don't like being outside in the cold. I don't know if anyone's tried to sleep outside in the cold. It gets tied in with a choice. Sometimes it feels easier to do what you know and stay out there, but that's not what's the cause of homelessness. I've learned over my years working with this that if I had what somebody's asking me that they need for housing, they would take it. They're not choosing that. So it's not a cause, but those urgent needs keep that door open so that we can keep navigating to housing. So we'll talk about some of the housing in this area in a little bit, but it's a long time to find stable housing. So this survival aid can keep people at least that Maslow's hierarchy, that bottom, if I can get somebody's brain where they can hear me and listen, and if that means I'm giving them a meal while we do that to work on housing, they're much more likely to be able to progress forward than if we don't meet any basic needs. Another myth, people experiencing homelessness in our community come from somewhere else. Majority of the people living unsheltered in our community have been here for years. They're not new, they've been a part of our community. Our data shows from the people on our current caseload, about 62 to 87% have ties or connections to our community. Now, this could mean that they lived here, left, and came back. This could mean that they have family here. They came here for a job, then lost it. We've heard that quite a bit. I'm not from Holland. I mentioned when I started here, we've been here about 10 years, but we came here for jobs. Other people do similar things, but basically, the vast majority of our unsheltered neighbors have had a long connection to this community. But it's really easy if we see them, that struggle is more visible than before, to just assume they're new people. So that myth sticks a little bit because it's just tempting to assume that. But blaming outsiders kind of doesn't help us address that real issue. If we focus on where someone is from instead of why they're losing housing, we risk ignoring that urgent need to invest in local solutions. So, another myth, and sorry, we'll have time to chat through these too, but there's a lot of them. I had to narrow it down. So, homelessness can be fixed with just one solution, like just build more housing. I wish it was that simple, it's not. But adding shelters or offering more services. There is not one answer that's gonna solve this. Again, I'm gonna go back to that easy button. Trust me, my team of 8 would have hit that button a long time ago if it was there, but we know it's not. But every solution does start with housing. All the data we've researched going back, if the less housing we have available in affordable places for people, the more people are going to experience homelessness. It's caused by a lot of different problems, and it's gonna take different solutions. But we do have to start somewhere. So again, the data shows that communities where they make the most progress in this is, one, we focus on helping people leave streets quickly, get into stable housing. We prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. So in our area, what we're finding, it's not too easy to be homeless. We're not making it easy to stay on the streets. It's too hard to stay housed, and it's too hard to stop being homeless. Basically, we like to call them exit ramps. We want to see more people who enter the streets, exit into whatever situation that looks like for them. We have very few exit ramps for people to leave. For example, that individual I mentioned earlier who finally got a house after, he's worked with the team for years, but he was living in a car he had saved up to purchase outside of his employment for a year. He was denied multiple apartments. He makes $18.62 an hour. You have to make 3 times the rent to qualify for some apartments. You have to put some of them holding fees in order to hold your place on a waiting list. So these are those complex systems. These are those barriers that people are facing to exiting homelessness. It's not that it's so easy to be outside, it's too hard to leave. And the data also shows that the longer somebody stays outside, the harder it is to exit. I like to use the example of diets. I don't know how many people have ever tried a diet and it didn't go well. Definitely me. You start to build habits, right? And those habits can be really hard to break. Similarly, if you're living outside and you go into that crisis brain I mentioned, you're just meeting, you're trying to figure out where you're gonna sleep every night, where you're gonna go to the bathroom, where your next meal's gonna come from. Your brain goes to solving those problems, that becomes a habit. The longer that habit becomes your daily life, the harder it is to break that. So the quicker we can get people connected with services that'll get them off that or out of that cycle or prevent it from starting, the less people are gonna experience homelessness. But it still comes down, if we don't have exit ramps for people, we just do what we can, so. It also sticks because homelessness is so complex. I've just shared even bits and pieces here in our short time together. Simple answers just feel better, right? I don't know, our brains are wired to see a problem, wanna fix it. That's what keeps us safe, right? That's how we look at a situation and say, okay, we put it in this box, and we want to address it and fix it. If it were that simple, we would have found it already, right? Housing helps people move forward, supports them, and helps them stay there is what we need both of. We need to find them housing, but we also need to help people stay there when they find it. And when we build a system that includes housing services, prevention, people and communities actually do better. So, what's really kind of driving homelessness in our area? I talked about it, I'm gonna keep saying it, housing shortage, that 1% rental vacancy rate, there simply are not enough. If we go back to that hermit crab example, we don't have enough housing up here for people that are ready to either move into bigger places that they can afford or maybe spend a little bit more on their housing. If people are not moving into those bigger ones, they stay put. That means we create this bottleneck down here for our people who really, really are struggling, who are making the $18.62 an hour, but that's still not 3 times rent when rent is roughly $1,100 to $1,200 a month for a single bedroom. There's just not enough across the board. So if we don't have enough across the board, we can't move people through those systems as effectively. There's gaps in support. Again, I shared a little bit about some of those, but, don't know if that was me. Okay, we talked about like job losses. You have that emergency medical bill comes out for like $1,000 and you don't have enough money to pay for that. There are not a lot of safety nets to catch people right now if they start to fall behind. Without some safety nets in place, those that are really struggling in our community don't have a lot to fall back on. And like we talked, 37% of people don't even have $400 worth to cover or a $400 emergency. You hit that, now your rent is due and you don't have enough money to pay rent. Sometimes you have to make tough choices. I believe Good Sam had 3,000 or 4,000 calls for people facing some form of eviction last year, just to put some perspective. So without enough systems to support people when they're needing it, we're going to see homelessness rise. And we've already seen that, but I fear that that's gonna happen more. We also do not have a lot of great safety supports for people leaving hospitals. There's not enough beds in, say, severe mental illness. We talked about that. For those that are struggling with that, there's not enough inpatient beds for people, so you're waiting 6 to 8 weeks to get into maybe a unit that might be able to help you. Now you're living outside for 6 to 8 weeks while you're waiting. People are aging out of foster care. Not a lot of great places for them to go. There's not a lot of safety nets for those individuals. Jail is a big one. You can, I think, argue why people are in jail and consequences of actions all day, but at the end of the day, they're still humans, and there's no place for people if you have any sort of criminal history. Even misdemeanors can set you back in housing. We go back to that, what I was talking about is there's not enough housing for individuals, right? If you're on a waiting list and you have a low credit score, any sort of criminal history, where do you think your name goes on that waiting list if somebody who comes in with a 720, they're making more than 3 times the rent, they have no criminal history? That becomes a big challenge. So we see a lot of individuals who are just trying to get better and improve, but we don't have systems for them to get through those. There's barriers to care. I talked about the mental health, substance use challenges. You can wait 6 to 8 weeks to get in. You're ready to help address some of those, or you're ready to move forward, but we can't get you in anywhere. Transportation to those doesn't exist. So now we're trying to figure out how to bus people out to other areas when we find beds. We know that though we leave some of those untreated though, that's when it really starts to compound and make things even more challenging for individuals. So, I know I'm going through a lot of this and I'll leave time for questions after. So what actually are we finding that works? Because this is a lot of very challenging and sometimes depressing talk, right? So what are we seeing that's working? It's a coordinated system. No one organization, not Community Action House, not Gateway Mission, not Good Samaritan Ministries, none of us are gonna solve it by ourselves. It does take all of us working together. Emergency shelters, housing developers, our case managers, that's what our team focuses on, mental health providers, all playing a role together. And what they partner is what we call a continuum of care, or a COC. This is a system in all counties. They have their own COC. For us here in Ottawa County, that's called the Lakeshore Housing Alliance. We come together and we try to address what are the gaps and barriers for individuals in our area facing homelessness and how do we keep them housed. Right now, it's a challenge. Our county's lost quite a bit of funding. Resilience, which is our domestic violence shelter, has lost funding, which means there's less people they can serve. We have less options for eviction prevention. Ottawa County Eviction Prevention has lost funding, which means people that are facing that, we can't really help them stop that process. But all of us working together, we've seen this happen. There's really, really cool examples if you ever want to go in your own research, and I couldn't fit it all in this little presentation. Chattanooga, Tennessee, they decided to focus on some homelessness. So what they did was took this old apartment complex and built permanent supportive housing. So this is geared towards individuals who are really struggling with some of that severe mental illness, who just need extra supports to stay housed. They saw a 73% decrease in their homeless population after a couple years, because they really focused their efforts as a collective group to say, 200 units for people who are really struggling. What do we do to get those people who are really struggling housed? Denver has some great examples. There was a recent article for Grand Rapids. Dégagé has their new critical care shelter, really focusing again on some of those particular individuals who are struggling the most. All of those individuals, I think, are still housed a year after they have done it. So it can work, but it takes a lot of us working together and a lot of people willing to understand and support that. Recognizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all. We can't just build one apartment complex and put everybody experiencing homelessness there, right? Because that's not what everybody needs. It's different, that some need transitional housing, some need to reach treatment centers first. It's gonna take a lot of different supports. So it takes people in the community who just wanna learn more and figure out ways to help navigate it too. Advocate for, right now, we have an individual working on housing. The apartment complex that they were applying to wants a $500 holding fee to hold your name on the wait list. If we have 37% of our community doesn't even have $400 for an emergency, I'm not sure where they have $500 to hold their name on a wait list. So understanding those complex things can help us as a community say, okay, is there something different we can do? Grand Rapids is looking at a way to make application fees can't be more than a certain amount. So it's things like that. And I believe City of Holland has that. How do we get the entire county to have that? That you can't pay more than $15 for an application fee just to apply for housing. So things like that. But it's gonna take more than just one single solution, so. But I'm going to say it again, housing. Solutions that focus on housing. At the end of the day, the root cause of homelessness is a lack of housing or a housing problem. The most consistent causes of it is that lack of affordable. For us, we're seeing the rising rents for people and low vacancy rates is leaving a lot of individuals. Again, I'm going to go back to our individual. He was just so excited to be able to go home from work. The team was able to take him some donated goods from our store to just have a bed and stuff like that for being able to say, but he worked for a year. He is not making even minimum wage. He's working at a factory, and he had a hard time finding housing. So the more that we don't have that, the more we're gonna see individuals struggling. So we have to find solutions that are gonna focus on expanding housing across the spectrum, and that could be more unique solutions. Austin, Texas, if anybody's heard of Community First Village. If not, I suggest Googling it. It's very interesting. They focused on chronic homelessness, but they built a tiny home community. And everyone in the community plays a different part, but that focus was those with chronic homelessness, the ones who've been outside for multiple years, multiple challenges, come into these tiny homes and meet with case managers regularly to help navigate what are those next steps. They also have people who live there full time, who have chosen that as their missional piece, and they're part of the community living alongside their neighbors. So it's a really cool thing. If you ever have time to Google that Community First Village, look it up. Again, didn't have enough time to go, I could be here probably all day talking about housing. So there are unique solutions out there, but we have to be ready to kind of explore those and see what they are. So spending time talking about all those myths, part of why we did that was, I think the more we explore that and those stigmas related to homelessness, if we get stuck believing just those, we kind of misunderstand the problem. We can overlook some of those real solutions that people need us to be able to see. It's easier to blame people than maybe the systems, right? It's easier to say, well, they made a choice and now they're homeless and that's their fault. I can't fix that. Are our systems able to help people? And it's easier to ignore those or not like address it because it feels like a big issue. And then it can delay that coordinated action our community needs. So if we get stuck in those myths and not willing to look at them with an open mind and examine them, we can get kind of stuck, that bottleneck idea that, well, this is the issue and that's just where it is. So, but when we focus on what works and we kind of invest in it, we see people change. It is solvable. We had 118 people find housing last year. We're on to 37 this year, and multiple. I heard the team was all excited. We have this little poster in our team area that every time somebody gets housed, they get to put a little person cutout on it. So it always feels good just to see that we're moving that needle, because we really do, at the end of the day, we want people off the streets. We believe everybody deserves a home. Nobody should have to be experiencing homelessness. So how do we solve that? Unfortunately, it's not easy, but it's starting by addressing internally what maybe our perceptions are or those myths are, and what are those stigmas we hear, and is that true, or can I learn more about it? Housing stability helps everyone. It has been proven for communities, it is cheaper to spend money on housing supports than it is to let people be homeless. The more people are contributing to our community, they find that safe place to live, they're likely to find and keep a job. If you've got a place you can shower for your job, you know where you're gonna eat, you're more likely to perform better at your job. Housing programs like that Housing First help people stay housed. They use fewer emergency services, less ER trips, less 911 calls, less police interventions. They just can meet that base level need down here at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. It is better for our community. We see an increase in productivity. Again, I'm gonna go back. How many people have been slept on the wrong side of the bed, woken up, and had to go to work the next day or go do something and you've just been super crabby? That's me regularly. Or you get sleep on my pillow wrong and now I'm upset and I just realized, okay, I got a pillow in a bed that I slept in. Now imagine if I had been sleeping outside and then I had to still get up and be that contributing members of society, right? We put a lot of emphasis on individuals to contribute to your society and be these expectations that you're gonna be a full member and do all these things to help out. If we don't have a safe place to live, it's really hard to do that. So it saves us money, it reduces pressure on all of our systems, it makes our community better for all of us if we have housing for everyone. So how can you help? It's a complex challenge, but at its core, it's a housing problem, and it's gonna take all of us to solve it. You can start by, if you see a neighbor you think is in need of non-emergency assistance, connect them with our team. So our team, I mentioned, has 8 team members. They have varying skills, but at the end of the day, they're focused on what we call housing case management. They go out and they try to meet individuals where they're at, find out what their challenge is to housing, and then work with them to try and address that. So if you see somebody that you think might be experiencing homelessness, whether that could be they're having a sign that says it, or sometimes they're carrying a big backpack of stuff or a cart load, you can certainly reach out to our team. You call, leave a message and a team's going out every single day to try and connect with people. And that's what we use that as our first starting point, right? Hey, I'm Jessica, I work with the outreach team. How are you doing? Can I get you anything? Let's just sit down and chat. Or directing them to some of our services. Another way that we meet a lot of people with like our refresh program is it's really scary to ask for help. I don't know if anyone's sometimes experienced that. I know I have, that I don't want to ask for help. I don't want to ask. So by offering low barrier options for people to just come in and be present, it gives them on their terms a chance to maybe breathe and a space that they feel welcomed and dignified in. And then our team is usually present at those locations to say, hey, I'm Jessica. I work with the outreach team. What brings you in today? And starting there, building that relationship. So that's our job. That's what we go out and do every single day, is go out and meet people. So that's one way you can help. Now, my marketing department would be really upset if I didn't include that there's always a way to give, but that can also be volunteering. Like I said, we have over 2,800 volunteers every year. You can volunteer at our food club, you can work with the refresh program, you can work at our resale store down on Washington. Lots of ways to kind of share some of your time is another way that you can always empower the work we're doing. There's the give. And then just by being present here is really, really helpful, starting to be ready to listen and understand what some of the challenges your neighbors in the community are facing. Like learning about what the issues are and how you can do that. So spreading the word, we continue to do opportunities like this, but you can go to our website, stop in and chat. Anytime there's opportunity to learn more is a huge piece. So you can always scan, if you have phones, the QR code, and I'll leave it up. That takes you to our website for any of that information. But that is it for my presentation part. So now I want to give some opportunity for any questions if anybody has it. I'll also be here for a few minutes if you have. I know it's a beautiful Sunday, and it's tulip time, and it's Mother's Day, so I appreciate that you were here in general. So,
Well, thank you so far, Jessica. And have you questions? Anything?
How do you measure your success personally?
my personal success, for me, it's a couple different things. This work is hard, right? Where my team needs to go out and meet people, some with very, very tragic stories, and then they do that over and over and over again every day. So the fact that my team keeps showing up every day in the face of that, or when we have other people who are not here, right, wanting to learn about homelessness, those myths are common stereotypes. They get faced with, well, why do you want to help those people? They're just lazy, you know? The fact that they show up every day and they're doing that with some stigma against the work that they do, and they're willing to still meet people, is a huge win for me. So it's hard to measure that, right? I don't know, have a statistic on that, but the fact that our team has been well committed to showing up and wanting to find people, I think shows to the fact that 37 people this year have found housing. 118, that was our highest year yet, even with a low vacancy rate. So they're going out and they're doing the good work, and then they're showing up to work the next day to do it again and cheer on their teammates and work with people. So that's a personal success, you know, finding ways to build resiliency in a field that oftentimes can be stigmatized for the type of work. So, yeah.
I appreciate your going through a number of myths that stand in the way of solving this problem. Mm-hmm. One that I would add to it, I think people believe that homeless people are dangerous.
Yes.
And I wonder what you might say to help us counter that myth.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great one. And that's one that's really hard. But the statistics show, and I work closely with HPD, so if anyone, the Holland Police Department, we actually work with a couple of their officers and their Sergeant John Weatherwax. I've got to do a couple opportunities with him where we go and talk about this. Data does not show that, right? Data shows that individuals who are experiencing homelessness are more likely to be the victims of violence than to have violence. And any violence that is occurring, the data shows that it's usually between two people experiencing homelessness versus towards general community. However, we go back to, I briefly mentioned that uncomfortable versus unsafe. What we don't know, we see people who are talking to themselves, that small group of people that we can visualize as having that mental challenge, they have found ways to protect themselves from being exploited or approached. I mean, and sometimes that can be very vocal. Most instances we see of any sort of violence isn't actual violence that way. It's aggressive. I've put a boundary. I've said, this is unsafe. And we take that as humans as unsafe, when really it's like, oh, I'm just uncomfortable with this situation. Or for others who haven't experienced much homelessness, you see somebody on the side, and I don't know much about that. That's new. My brain goes into its own version of protection and says, I don't know what that is. I'm going to label that as unsafe because whether it's a stigma I've heard or I just don't understand, I feel uncomfortable with it. And so our brain's like uncomfortable and unsafe. But I can say off this work, my daughter can contest, she helps volunteer at Refresh. I don't have concerns. Most people. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be aware of your surroundings, but I say that in any situation. I am more likely to probably experience some sort of violence out at the grocery store against other individuals in the community, not just unhoused. But it's really hard to take those myths and those perceptions that this community is violent when we're feeling uncomfortable. And it starts with that.
If we come across people, either in a camping situation or individual, would you suggest calling the police or calling your office first? We've also been told, call the police, they will connect. What do you say to that?
Either option is good. So I like to say use your best judgment, and sometimes I know that can be left to interpretation. If you feel like there's a potential unsafe scenario, or you're just not sure, or that uncomfortable is you're like, I don't know how I feel, call the police. We have a really strong working relationship with the officers, so that oftentimes if it is just more of that uncomfortable versus unsafe, they're gonna let us know. So we have sharing opportunities we do with them that they let us know when they come across maybe an encampment. A lot of times we already know the individual, but if not, we're making sure we're getting connected. Or if you just see it, like a lot of times maybe you're driving down the road and you see something, you can certainly like, well, it doesn't look like there's any unsafe activity, nothing concerning, feel free to call us. But if it's easier to call the non-emergent line, then do that. So, but what usually happens is if you call us, we're gonna send a team out, hopefully if they're sooner rather than later, but sometimes they're out in another part of the county or working with people, they'll get out there as soon as they can. But we'll send a team out to go check in on those individuals and see how they're doing, find out if we're connected. So it's really up to you. But if you certainly see something that looks unsafe, or you're like, I'm not sure, the police is a great direction to take too. So, yeah.
I'm wondering if what appears to be the attitude of many people nationally and locally, how has that exacerbated the problem in Ottawa County? It seems, I'm ashamed to be a person who lives in Ottawa County sometimes. And it's just so frustrating.
Yeah. Welcome to my daily job. So I think for me, what is starting to understand why we even talked about some of those myths. Yeah, there's a whole list of myths we could really, and I think you bringing up the one about violence is a really good one to address too. But we hear they're lazy. They don't, all of these different things, right? Starting to really dig in like, okay, so what is that? What does that really mean? And I wish I had a really easy solution, but I think it's by starting to understand some of the basic ones and going, well, no, actually, it's this. It's harder to leave the streets than it is to live on them. We don't have enough places for people to go. There's the phrases, like handouts don't help, right? I want to be very clear. We have to label what a handout is in order to say it doesn't help. So our team's not going out and just handing out money, right? We're not just giving out pieces. What we're doing is we're using maybe food, because that's a basic necessity. I think everybody deserves the right to eat. And saying, hey, let's sit down and work on those next steps, because unfortunately those next steps don't happen overnight. So.
Do you run into people whose attitude is more aimed at, we don't want them here?
Yeah, we call those either the ones that just don't want to hear, or also the term NIMBYs, not in my backyard. We have a lot of people who are like, yeah, well, I'd love to see that over there. My challenge to that is if we just move it to another location where we can't see it, what have we done? We've only moved it. We haven't solved it. Those people who are struggling and suffering with homelessness, whether they're doing it here downtown or up on the north side or in Zeeland or Grand Haven, are still homeless. So what good is moving it to where we can't see it, getting it where we don't have to deal with it, if people are still unsheltered? They're still suffering, just in a different area. I really, and for me, want to be part of the community that goes, okay, I see it, I recognize it, I don't want to see it, but I don't want to see it because I want people to have a home, not because I don't want to see it. So how do I solve that? How am I part of a community that solves homelessness, not shoves it to another area? And fortunately, that's a hard question to answer, and it takes us going, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable with this. Is it I'm uncomfortable, or am I actually unsafe? And majority of the time, I'm just uncomfortable with seeing it. So sometimes it can start with just getting to know the people that are struggling with homelessness. Ask them why they're homeless, if you want to. They'll tell you, or if they don't, they'll walk away, right? Getting to know the people. I've learned to meet so many wonderful individuals through this work that I've been blessed to be able to talk to. They'll tell you why. Getting to know the people and what they really need, not just putting in another spot, because that doesn't solve it. So I know it's not an easy answer, but again, it's that easy button. looking for it. I just don't have it.
Linda first, and then you, Dan.
The south side of the city of Holland slops over into Allegan County. Do you serve everybody within the city limits, regardless of whether it's Allegan or Ottawa?
That's a really great question. So we work closely with a lot of different agencies. So technically for housing services, it's Ottawa County. But Allegan County has its own, that COC, all of that we were talking about, a lot of acronyms. They have what's called On Point. And so we then make referrals out to them. Now, Holland Police Department covers both counties, but the city. So we just try to make sure we know what the resources are and navigate. For like our food club and everything, that doesn't matter. Anybody in the area can use it. They can come from outside the area to utilize it. So it's a complex answer, but yes, we try to work with anybody, and if we're not directly in housing that we can do Ottawa, we make that connection to Allegan. So.
As 16th Street goes towards the interstate, there are these massive apartment structures going up.
Mm-hmm.
South of that in Waverly, there are more.
Yeah.
Does this do anything to alleviate your problem, or is it all automatically overpriced?
That's a really great question. So I will say Ottawa County is making a lot of strides. I think they're putting in around 5,000 units around Ottawa County of some form of housing, which is great. The Ottawa Needs Assessment that I talked about from 2021 said we needed 15,000 units to meet the growing need of the population. So we're making dents. And all housing is good housing. As much as I want to see lower income housing for certain people, all housing will help our system and help people move forward. But we're only a third of the way there. And so that's still a lot of pieces. So that one going up, I believe, home flats, will be beneficial for some. Unfortunately, we're still going to have, what we're seeing is a lot of seniors on fixed incomes lately. Aging, they're living in their cars. They're having to sell off property to try and afford, but they're not making enough income. I go back to a lot of apartment complexes, you have to make at least 3 times the rent to qualify. Fixed income with Social Security is not 3 times the rent. And so it does. All housing's good housing, in my opinion, but it doesn't alleviate all of the problem. And so we're gonna have to really be prepared to think creatively in the future here when those safety nets, all those pieces we kind of chatted about and some of the myths aren't there. I do fear that in the next few years we're going to be seeing a lot harsher conditions for some individuals if we don't start addressing it now. So,
one of the things that Lori would very much want us to make sure people knew is that we have been working as a church with Community Action House for many years in many ways, which probably accounts for some of the absence of people here today, in addition to the other things. For those of you who are here able to see this screen, I hope you noticed that Joel Tanis's mural was in one of the scenes.
Yep, it was at the beginning.
At the food club, yep. And if you haven't been out there, I can only urge you to go out and look at what they have done with that food club and the whole facility with the many other services that are there. So I think that too is seeing is believing.
Yeah.
So any other questions for Jessica?
And if you have any, feel free to reach out, or I can leave my cards or get contact information. You're welcome to ask, or stop by Food Club and ask some questions. And so we'll gladly try to answer those. So,
do you want to say anything at this point, excuse me, about how you are working with the young children who are the ones that are going to be the future, who will have known nothing but loss of housing or never having known housing, in terms of how they can teach values and help to get them prepared for someday homeowners?
Yeah, that's a great, so all schools have what they call a homeless liaison. That's part of the McKinney-Vento grant, where all schools need to provide that service. So if a family is facing some form of housing instability, and that could be doubled up as a number or a statistic people use, so there's 2 families living in a place meant for 1 family, or they're sleeping in neighbors, houses and that sort of thing. I would encourage those families, if you know of them, to connect with their school. their school. So there's a myth too, and like I said, there's so many myths, I couldn't even. Experiencing homelessness in and of itself is not like a reportable offense to community, like Child Protective Services, for example. Poverty is not neglect or abuse. So there's a myth out there that if you are experiencing homelessness with children, you're gonna get reported to CPS and they're gonna take your kids away. That's not the case. We work very closely with DHS. Now, I will say our CPS has a lot of great services that they can offer families that my team can't because we don't have that. So if you have families who are struggling with that housing insecurity, you can get connected with your schools. That school liaison can get them connected with different services to start addressing homelessness or housing insecurity, whatever it is. So we want families to get connected to the resources that are there to help them. But one of those myths is that, well, if I'm experiencing homelessness, they're gonna take my kids away. That's not true. Now, it does happen when there is actual neglect concerns, and I don't wanna say that it doesn't ever happen, but I've seen far more families still living together in their vehicles than children being taken away. So that is one to address with families and to kids. Like, let's get them connected to those services sooner to address those instead of waiting until it's so much harder to address them. So.
Well, you've given us a lot of information and food to think about mentally and physically. I'll just throw this in as a farewell. I don't know if you want to address the question, but I'm wondering if maybe the arrival of a new pope with different value systems is going to help a lot of us to see things in the way that they need to be seen. So thank you for being here. And if you want to make a comment, that would be fine. But what values
only hope
us?
that change can bring new perspectives is what, and not maybe even bad ones, worse ones, or indifferent. But change always has purpose, so that's what I usually.
Well, thank you, those of you who are here and who've been watching on Zoom, and thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.